I am Audrey, 28 years old, and I trusted my parents with everything, including the $87,000 I had saved since my first job at 16. When they called me sobbing about possibly losing our family home, I had no idea they were the reason my decade of hard-earned savings had vanished overnight. The betrayal blindsided me completely, leaving me to question everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. Before I dive into this painful story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. If my journey resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of survivors who have learned the hard way that sometimes the deepest wounds come from those closest to us. Growing up in Lakeside, Michigan, a small working-class town where everyone knew each other, I was always the responsible child. Our family of 4 lived in a modest 3-bedroom house that my parents had purchased when they were newlyweds. My father worked as a foreman at the local factory, while my mother taught 3rd grade at the elementary school. We never had much, but my parents made sure we never went without necessities. My brother Jason was 4 years older than me, and had always been the golden child of the family. With his charismatic personality and athletic prowess, he charmed everyone around him, especially our parents. Throughout his high school years, Jason was the football star who could do no wrong. When he broke curfew, it was because he was celebrating with friends. When he crashed the family car, it was just an accident that could happen to anyone. When he needed money for the latest video game or designer clothes, our parents somehow always found the funds. Meanwhile, I was the quiet, studious one, who spent weekends helping my grandmother with her garden or working part-time jobs. I started babysitting at 12, took on a paper route at 14, and by 16, I was working at the local grocery store after school and on weekends. My parents always praised my work ethic, but never seemed to notice how differently they treated us. The pattern continued into our adult years. Jason attended 3 different colleges, never completing a degree, with our parents covering his tuition and living expenses each time. When he decided college was not for him, they helped him move to Chicago, where he jumped from job to job, calling home whenever he needed money to cover rent or pay off credit card debt. I took a different path. After graduating high school as valedictorian, I received a partial scholarship to the state university, but still needed to work throughout college to cover the remaining tuition and expenses. I double majored in accounting and finance, graduating with honors. Even with my scholarship and working 30 hours a week, I still accumulated $22,000 in student loans. The day I received my first full-time job offer as a junior accountant at Wilson & Associates, I created a detailed financial plan. I would live as frugally as possible, paying off my student loans while simultaneously building savings for a home down payment. I shared a tiny apartment with 2 roommates, drove a 12-year-old Honda Civic that constantly needed repairs, packed lunches every day, and limited socializing to free community events or affordable coffee dates with friends. Within 3 years, I had paid off my student loans completely, an accomplishment that filled me with pride. My parents congratulated me but quickly turned the conversation to how Jason was considering opening his own business and how talented he was with people. I smiled and nodded, accustomed to their focus shifting to my brother. Over the next 4 years, I continued saving diligently. I moved to a slightly better apartment with just 1 roommate and allowed myself small luxuries like a monthly dinner at a restaurant or occasional new clothes from outlet stores. But mostly I remained focused on my goal, saving enough for a down payment on a modest home of my own. By my 28th birthday, I had accumulated $87,000 in my savings account. My target was $100,000, which would allow me to comfortably purchase a small home in a safe neighborhood with a manageable mortgage. I was so close to achieving my dream that I had started browsing real estate listings online, imagining what it would be like to have a place that was truly mine. My parents knew about my savings. 2 years ago, when I was hospitalized with appendicitis, I had given them access to my accounts in case of emergency. My mother had needed to pay some of my medical bills while I was recovering, and I had never thought to revoke their access afterward. Why would I? These were my parents, the people who had taught me about honesty and responsibility, the people I trusted most in the world. Looking back, there were signs of financial strain in my family that I chose to ignore. During holiday visits, I noticed my parents arguing in hushed tones about bills. My father postponed his retirement twice, My mother mentioned cutting back on her book club because the monthly dinner had become too expensive. But whenever I asked if everything was okay, they assured me they were fine, just being cautious with money as they always had been. Then there was Jason, who, despite his perpetual money troubles, drove a new Audi and posted photos from expensive restaurants and weekend trips on social media. When I asked how he afforded such luxuries, he vaguely mentioned investments and side hustles. I assumed he had finally found his financial footing and was proud of him for it. This spring, I received a promotion to senior accountant with a significant salary increase. With my new income, I adjusted my timeline and decided I could begin house hunting immediately rather than waiting until fall. The housing market in my area was heating up, and I wanted to secure a property before prices rose further. I began working with a realtor named Diana, who quickly found several properties within my budget. One in particular caught my eye, a charming 2-bedroom craftsman-style house with a small backyard, perfect for the garden I had always wanted. When Diana called to tell me another buyer was interested, I decided to make an offer immediately and went to transfer the down payment from my savings account. That was the moment everything changed. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I logged into my online banking to transfer funds for the down payment. The office was quiet with most of my coworkers at lunch. I remembered feeling excited, my finger hovering over the mouse, ready to take this monumental step toward independence. Then I saw my balance, $4,200. I blinked, assuming I had accidentally clicked on my checking account instead of savings. I navigated back to the account overview page and clicked on my savings account again. The same number appeared, $4,200. My heart began racing and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. There had to be some mistake. Just last month, I had checked my balance and had over $86,000. I scrolled through the transaction history, and what I saw made my stomach drop. Multiple withdrawals over the past 3 months, ranging from $5,000 to $20,000 each. All of them had the same description, in-person withdrawal. But I had not stepped foot in that bank branch in over a year, preferring to handle my banking online or through the ATM. Someone else had been withdrawing my money, someone with access to my account. With trembling hands, I called the bank customer service line. After verifying my identity, I explained the situation, my voice cracking with each word. The representative pulled up my account. Yes, she confirmed. There had been 8 withdrawals totaling $82,800 between February and April. All transactions were conducted in person at my local branch by an authorized user on my account, Margaret Williams, my mother. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. The room seemed to spin around me as I tried to process this information. There had to be a mistake. My mother would never steal from me. Maybe her identity had been stolen. Maybe the bank had made an error. The customer service representative asked if I wanted to report fraudulent activity, but I could not bring myself to say yes. Not yet. Not without talking to my mother first. I hung up and immediately called my mother, but the call went straight to voicemail. I tried my father with the same result. Finally, I texted them both. Need to talk ASAP about my savings account. Please call me. My phone rang less than 2 minutes later. It was my mother, her voice unnaturally high-pitched and brittle. When I asked her directly about the withdrawals, her response was evasive. She mentioned something about a temporary family emergency and promised they would explain everything soon before I could press further. She said she had to go, but that they would call me back that evening. They never called. The next morning, I called again and reached my father. His voice sounded tired and strained as he suggested I come home that weekend so we could discuss everything in person. When I insisted on knowing what had happened to my money immediately, he simply said, "This is not a conversation for the phone, Audrey. Please come home Saturday. We will explain everything then." The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I could barely eat or sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the number $4,200 flashing like a neon sign. I called in sick to work on Wednesday. Unable to focus on anything, my mind raced through possible scenarios, each more concerning than the last. By Thursday, I had to return to work, but I was a shell of myself. My colleague Sarah noticed my distraction and pulled me aside at lunch. After some gentle prodding, I broke down and told her everything. Sarah, whose mother was a retired attorney, immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation. "That is theft, Audrey," she said firmly. "Authorized user or not, your mother had no right to withdraw your money without permission. You need to protect yourself." Sarah helped me make a list of immediate actions, documenting all transactions, printing bank statements, consulting with an attorney, and potentially filing a police report. The last item made me physically ill to consider. How could I report my own parents to the police? But Sarah reminded me that $82,000 was not a small sum to be written off as a misunderstanding. Friday night, I packed an overnight bag and began the 3-hour drive to my hometown. Every mile closer increased my anxiety. By the time I pulled into the familiar driveway of my childhood home, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn off the ignition. I sat in the car for several minutes, gathering my courage. Through the living room window, I could see my parents sitting together on the couch, their faces drawn with worry. My brother Jason's Audi was parked across the street, confirming my suspicion that this family meeting would include him as well. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door, still clinging to the hope that there was a reasonable explanation for everything. That my parents had not betrayed me in the worst possible way. That my decade of sacrifice and discipline had not been undone in a matter of months. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I just was not prepared for how much worse it would be than I had imagined. The moment I stepped through the front door of my childhood home, I noticed changes that made my stomach tighten even further. The living room featured a new leather sectional sofa replacing the worn fabric couch. I remembered fresh paint brightened the walls, and the outdated carpet had been replaced with hardwood flooring. The kitchen, visible through the archway, showcased new stainless steel appliances and granite countertops that definitely had not been there during my Christmas visit. My mother rushed forward to hug me, her embrace tighter than usual. My father stood awkwardly behind her, his face haggard with deep worry lines I had never noticed before. Jason lounged in the new recliner, offering a casual wave as though this were any ordinary family gathering. "Dinner has been ready for 20 minutes, my mother said, her voice overly cheerful. "I made your favorite lasagna." The next hour was excruciating. We sat around the dining table, making forced small talk about my job, the weather, and a neighbor's new baby. No one mentioned money, savings accounts, or the reason for my visit. My parents kept exchanging nervous glances while Jason dominated the conversation with stories about the customers at his new sports bar. "Wait," I interrupted, staring at my brother. "You opened a sports bar?" Jason grinned proudly. 6 months ago, downtown Chicago, prime location near Wrigley Field. You should come check it out sometime. We are killing it on game days." I noticed my parents suddenly became very interested in their food, avoiding eye contact. The pieces were starting to fit together in my mind, but I waited until after dinner when my mother suggested we move to the living room for coffee. Once we were seated, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Audrey, we owe you an explanation," he began, his voice unsteady. "There is no easy way to say this, but we used some of your savings as collateral for a business loan for Jason's sports bar." "Some?" I repeated incredulously. "You took $82,800. That is 95% of my entire savings." My mother reached for my hand, which I pulled away. "We never meant to touch the money," she insisted, tears forming in her eyes. "It was just supposed to be listed as collateral. The bank required it for the loan approval. Jason had investors lined up, but they wanted to see the loan secured first." "It was a guaranteed success," Jason interjected. "Prime location, experienced manager. Everyone said it could not fail." "So, what happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Things got complicated," my father said vaguely. "The renovations cost more than expected. Some investors backed out at the last minute. And you decided to use my money instead of telling me." I could feel anger building, replacing the shock and hurt. "We were going to tell you," my mother insisted. "We just needed to wait until the bar started showing a profit. Then Jason would have paid everything back with interest. You would never have known the difference." The casual way she described their deception stunned me into momentary silence. They had not just borrowed the money, they had planned to hide it from me completely. "So why am I finding out now?" I finally asked. My parents exchanged another worried look. My father sighed heavily before answering. "The bar has not been performing as well as projected," he admitted. There were unexpected expenses, licensing issues, problems with the manager Jason hired. Jason jumped in defensively. It is not my fault. The city changed some regulations right after we opened, and that manager was recommended by one of Dad's friends. He turned out to be completely incompetent. I closed my eyes trying to maintain my composure. And my money, I asked? What exactly happened to it? Another uncomfortable silence filled the room. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice small and frightened. The bank called in the loan, she whispered. Jason missed 4 payments in a row. My father continued, his voice breaking. We had to use the money you had saved as collateral. The bank withdrew it directly to cover the defaulted loan. I stared at them in disbelief. The money I had saved for 12 years through countless extra shifts and sacrificed pleasures was gone. Used to bail out my brother yet again. But that is not the worst part, my mother added, now openly crying. The loan was for $120,000, my father explained. Your savings covered most of it, but we are still short. The bank is threatening to foreclose on our house. We put it up as additional collateral. I felt like I was drowning, unable to process the magnitude of their betrayal. They had not only stolen my savings, but had also put their home at risk. And now they were looking at me with desperate hope in their eyes. Jason finally spoke directly to me, his tone casual, as if asking to borrow $20. So, we were hoping you could help us out with your new promotion and all. Maybe take out a loan to cover the rest to save the family home. The audacity of their request hit me like a physical blow. They had stolen my dream and were now asking me to sacrifice even more to fix their mistakes. In that moment, I finally saw the truth of our family dynamic with complete clarity. They had never expected Jason to succeed or be responsible, and they had always expected me to clean up after him, no matter the cost to myself. I excused myself from the living room, claiming I needed to use the bathroom. Instead, I fled upstairs to my childhood bedroom, locking the door behind me. The room remained frozen in time. Same twin bed with its floral comforter. Same desk where I had studied for countless exams. Same bulletin board covered with academic achievement certificates and honor roll recognitions. I collapsed onto the bed, my body shaking with silent sobs. The physical pain of betrayal felt like being hollowed out from the inside. Every sacrifice I had made flashed through my mind. The 12-year-old car I kept repairing rather than replacing. The tiny apartment with temperamental heating. The brown bag lunches. The declined invitations to concerts and vacations with friends. Meanwhile, Jason had lived with no such restrictions. I remembered his social media posts from just months ago. Courtside basketball tickets, a weekend in Miami, dining at exclusive restaurants. I had assumed he was finally earning good money. Now I realized he had been spending mine. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Emma. How did it go? Call me if you need to talk. Emma had been my roommate in college and remained my closest friend. She knew every detail of my financial goals and how hard I had worked toward them. With trembling fingers, I called her. When she answered, I could barely speak through my tears. Emma listened patiently as I poured out the whole story, her gasps of disbelief punctuating my narrative. Audrey, this is not just morally wrong, it is illegal, she said when I finished. They committed fraud. They stole from you. I know, I whispered. But they are my parents, and now they might lose their home. That is not your problem to fix, Emma insisted. They made these choices. They prioritized Jason over your future. Again, you do not owe them a bailout. We talked for nearly an hour, Emma helping me process my emotions and consider my options. By the time we hung up, I felt marginally calmer and more resolved to protect myself, even if it meant standing up to my family for the first time in my life. Around midnight, the house finally quiet. I crept downstairs to my father's home office. I needed to see the loan documents for myself to understand exactly what had happened. The office door was unlocked, and I easily found a folder labeled Jason's Bar on my father's meticulously organized desk. What I discovered made me physically ill. The loan had indeed been for $120,000, but the terms were predatory with an interest rate of 17%. My father had signed as primary guarantor with my mother as co-signer. Most devastating was a document authorizing the use of my savings account as collateral, featuring a signature that looked like mine, but definitely was not. They had forged my signature. There were also bank statements showing how the loan money had been spent. Less than half had actually gone toward the bar renovations and operating costs. The rest had been transferred directly to Jason's personal account or withdrawn as cash. $28,000 for a down payment on his Audi, $12,000 for a vacation to Cabo San Lucas, thousands more for designer clothes, electronics, and restaurants. I photographed every document with my phone, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. This was not just poor judgment or a well-intentioned mistake. This was deliberate fraud and theft. The next morning, I confronted my brother alone in the kitchen while our parents were still asleep. I showed him the photographs of the bank statements, demanding an explanation for how he had spent the loan that had cost me my savings. At first, he tried to charm his way out of it, claiming the car and other expenses were actually business-related. Networking is part of owning a bar. Sis, you would not understand. When I remained unmoved, his demeanor changed completely. His face hardened as he hissed. You have always been so self-righteous, so perfect. You can easily save that money again with your fancy job. Why do you have to make such a big deal about this? Because it was mine, I responded, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I earned every dollar of it. You stole my future, he rolled his eyes. Always so dramatic. It is just money. In that moment, I realized there would never be genuine remorse or understanding from Jason. In his mind, my savings had simply been a convenient solution to his problems with no consideration for the impact on my life. Over the next week, the pressure from my family intensified. Daily phone calls from my mother tearfully begging me to help them save the house. My father sending texts about how they would be homeless at their age. Aunts and uncles reaching out, some expressing sympathy for my situation, but most suggesting I should forgive and help my parents, because family comes first. The stress began affecting my work performance. I missed deadlines, made uncharacteristic errors in financial reports, and zoned out during important meetings. My boss took me aside to ask if everything was all right, and I gave a vague excuse about family issues. I was granted a week of personal leave to sort things out. During that week, I barely left my apartment. I oscillated between rage, grief, and paralyzing anxiety about my financial future. My dream home was now out of reach. I would have to start over from nearly nothing at 28, with housing prices rising every month. After days of emotional turmoil, I finally reached out to a financial advisor recommended by a colleague. The meeting was a turning point. Patricia, a straightforward woman in her 50s, listened to my story without judgment before offering practical advice. You have 3 paths forward, she explained. You can walk away and start rebuilding your savings, accepting the loss. You can loan your parents money to save their house with legal documentation, this time, or you can pursue legal action to recover your stolen funds. When I expressed concern about the impact of legal action on my family, Patricia looked me directly in the eyes. Audrey, they did not show that same concern for you when they took your money without permission. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for those we love is hold them accountable for their actions. Her words resonated deeply. After years of enabling Jason and expecting me to do the same, perhaps what my family needed most was not another bailout, but a hard lesson in consequences. That afternoon, I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer. The law office of Thomas Wilson was located in a converted Victorian house downtown. The interior maintained its historic charm while functioning as a modern legal practice. I felt oddly comforted by the solid oak furniture and walls lined with law books, tangible symbols of order and justice. When my life felt chaotic and unfair, Thomas himself was younger than I expected, perhaps in his mid-30s, but his confident demeanor immediately put me at ease. He listened attentively as I recounted my story, occasionally asking clarifying questions and taking notes. When I finished, I spread out the photos of the documents on his desk. He examined them carefully before looking up at me with a serious expression. Audrey, I want to be completely clear about this situation. What your parents did constitutes several criminal offenses: fraud, forgery, and theft. The amount involved makes it grand theft, which carries significant penalties, including potential jail time. My stomach clenched at his words. The thought of my parents in legal trouble was devastating despite their betrayal. Could we handle this without involving the police? I asked. Maybe just a civil case to recover my money. Thomas leaned back in his chair. Considering we could pursue a civil judgment, yes, but given what you have told me about your brother's spending habits and your parents' financial situation, collecting on that judgment would be difficult. They simply might not have the money to pay you back. He went on to explain my options, including the possibility of pressing criminal charges, which would involve the police and district attorney. The evidence I had gathered would make a compelling case for prosecution. A year ago, I could never have imagined sitting in a lawyer's office, contemplating legal action against my own family. But the documents spread before me told a story that could not be ignored or excused. This was not a misunderstanding or a desperate act in a moment of crisis. It was a calculated deception carried out over months, with no intention of ever telling me. I need time to think, I finally said. Thomas nodded understandingly. Take whatever time you need, but I would advise securing your remaining assets immediately. Change your bank accounts, remove any authorized users, check your credit report, and freeze your credit. I followed his advice that same day, creating new accounts at a different bank and transferring my remaining funds. The bank manager looked concerned when I explained why I needed to close my account so urgently, but became genuinely alarmed when I showed her the forged documents. This is a serious matter, she said. Our fraud department will need to investigate. The bank may pursue its own action against the parties involved. After leaving the bank, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. Practical steps had been taken to protect myself, but the situation with my family was escalating beyond my control. The bank's investigation would proceed regardless of my personal feelings. That evening, I drafted a detailed email to my parents. I explained exactly what I knew about the loan, the forgery, and how the money had been spent. I outlined the potential legal consequences they faced, including criminal charges and civil liability. I made it clear that I would not be providing additional funds to save their house. Their response came within the hour. A phone call from my father, his voice trembling with a combination of fear and indignation. You cannot seriously be threatening to send your own parents to jail, he said. After everything we have done for you. His words ignited a spark of anger that had been building inside me for days. What exactly have you done for me, Dad? I asked. You raised me, yes. You provided a home and basic necessities, which is what parents are supposed to do. But as an adult, what support have you actually given me? I worked my way through college. I paid off my own student loans. I saved for my own future while you poured resources into Jason. But we are family, he protested. Family stands together. Is that what you were doing when you forged my signature? When you took my savings without even asking me? Was that standing together as a family? His silence spoke volumes. I do not want to see you and Mom suffer, I continued, my voice softening slightly, but I cannot fix this for you, not this time. After hanging up, I sat in my darkened apartment, wondering if I had just permanently damaged my relationship with my parents. The thought brought fresh tears, but also a strange sense of liberation. For the first time, I had advocated for myself instead of accommodating their expectations. The next few days brought an onslaught of reactions from extended family. Some, like my maternal grandmother and an uncle who had always seen through Jason's charm, expressed support for my position. Others were openly hostile, accusing me of being selfish and vindictive. My cousin Amy, who had always been close to Jason, called to tell me I was destroying the family over money. I simply asked her how much of her savings she would be willing to give Jason, which ended the conversation quickly. A week after my initial consultation with Thomas, I made my decision. I would file a police report about the forgery and theft, but expressed to the authorities that I preferred restitution over incarceration for my parents. I would also formally dispute the bank withdrawals and pursue civil action to recover my funds. When I informed my parents of my decision, my mother broke down completely. Between sobs, she revealed that this was not the first time they had faced financial ruin because of Jason. There had been gambling debts in his early 20s, a failed restaurant investment 5 years ago, and numerous maxed-out credit cards they had paid off to protect his credit score. They had re-mortgaged their house twice to cover his financial disasters, which explained why they were still making payments on a home they had originally purchased 30 years ago. Why did you keep bailing him out? I asked, genuinely confused. "He is our son," my mother replied, as if that explained everything. "We could not just let him fail." "But you let me lose everything I worked for," I pointed out. "Does being your daughter count for less?" Her silence was answer enough. Filing the police report was one of the hardest things I had ever done. The detective who took my statement was professional and non-judgmental, but I still felt physically ill providing evidence against my own parents. As I signed the completed report, I wondered if I would ever be able to repair my relationship with them, or if this necessary act of self-protection would create a permanent rift. That night, my brother called, more angry than I had ever heard him. The police had already contacted him for questioning. "You ungrateful bitch," he snarled. "After everything this family has done for you, do you have any idea what you have started? Mom and Dad could go to jail because of you." I remained calm despite my racing heart. "No, Jason. They could go to jail because all of you stole from me. This is not my fault. This is the consequence of your actions. You will regret this," he threatened before hanging up. His words left me shaken, but even more certain I had made the right decision. The brother I had grown up with, who had once protected me from playground bullies and taught me to ride a bike, had become someone who valued his own desires above everything and everyone else. It was time for all of us to face reality. 2 weeks after I filed the police report, the investigation was in full swing. The bank had frozen my parents' remaining assets pending the outcome, which included the funds from my savings that had not yet been spent. A forensic accountant was tracking exactly where the money had gone, building a case that grew stronger by the day. My parents were facing potential criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and grand theft. The gravity of their situation had finally sunk in. My father, once proud and authoritative, now sounded defeated on the phone. My mother had developed anxiety so severe she required medication to sleep. The family home had entered the initial stages of foreclosure. They had 30 days to bring the loan current before the bank would proceed with public notices and eventually auction. The deadline loomed like a shadow over every conversation. Jason predictably had disappeared. When the police attempted to question him further about his role in the fraud and his use of the stolen funds, they discovered he had cleaned out his apartment and left no forwarding address. His cell phone was disconnected. Even his social media accounts had been deactivated. My parents had not heard from him since the investigation began. His abandonment seemed to break something in my mother. After years of making excuses for him, she finally admitted the truth during a tearful phone call. "We have been enabling him his entire life," she confessed. "Every time he faced consequences, we stepped in to shield him. We thought we were showing him love, but we were actually preventing him from growing up." I listened silently, processing her belated realization. "And you," she continued, her voice catching. "We always leaned on you to be the responsible one. We took your strength and reliability for granted. We never worried about you because you always handled everything so well. It was wrong of us, and I am so sorry." Her apology, while appreciated, could not undo the damage. My savings were still gone. My dream home had been purchased by another buyer. My trust in my family was shattered, but it was the first step toward honesty between us. My father was slower to acknowledge the dysfunction in our family. He remained defensive and focused on practical matters like potentially filing for bankruptcy to protect what little they had left. It took a health scare to finally break through his stubborn pride. 3 weeks into the investigation, he experienced severe chest pains and was rushed to the hospital. It was not a heart attack as initially feared, but doctors diagnosed him with stress-induced hypertension and warned that without significant lifestyle changes, he was at high risk for a cardiac event. I visited him in the hospital, finding him looking small and vulnerable in the standard issue gown, IV lines running into his arm. For the first time since I was a child, I saw my father cry. "I have failed as a parent," he said, wiping roughly at his tears. "I thought I was building a safety net for my family, but I was actually weaving a web that trapped all of us. Jason never learned responsibility. You never received the support you deserved. And now we might lose everything." His acknowledgement marked a turning point in our family dynamic. The idealized image of my parents as infallible authorities had been replaced by the reality of flawed individuals who had made serious mistakes. In some ways, this more honest perception allowed for the possibility of a more authentic relationship moving forward. As the investigation continued, I found myself at a crossroads. The evidence gathered was substantial enough that the district attorney was preparing to file criminal charges against my parents. Jason remained missing, but warrants had been issued for his arrest. The family home was weeks away from foreclosure. Thomas, my attorney, called to inform me that the bank had recovered approximately $36,000 from my parents' accounts and Jason's business accounts that could be traced directly back to my stolen savings. The bank was prepared to return these funds to me immediately. The sports bar equipment and furnishings would be liquidated to recover additional funds, but that process would take time and yield uncertain results. "Do you want to proceed with criminal charges?" he asked. "Given your parents' cooperation and the partial recovery of funds, you could request the DA consider a plea arrangement that might avoid jail time." The decision weighed heavily on me. Part of me wanted justice in its fullest form, a consequence severe enough to match the violation I had experienced. But another part recognized that sending my elderly parents to jail would not restore my savings or heal our relationship. I requested a meeting with my parents before making my final decision. We gathered at my apartment, neutral territory, where we could speak freely. They looked years older than they had just weeks earlier, their faces lined with worry and regret. For hours, we talked honestly about the patterns in our family. My mother admitted she had always favored Jason, seeing in him the popular, outgoing child she had wished to be in her own youth. My father confessed that he had projected his own failed business ambitions onto Jason, funding ventures he should have recognized as doomed from the start. I shared how their different treatment of us had affected me, the hurt of watching Jason receive support and bailouts while I worked multiple jobs, the frustration of having my achievements overshadowed by concern for Jason's latest crisis, the profound betrayal of having my financial security sacrificed without my knowledge or consent. By the end of our conversation, we had reached a fragile understanding. They finally saw the full extent of their actions and the damage they had caused. I acknowledged that their mistakes, while severe, had come from misguided love rather than malice. As they prepared to leave, I made a decision that surprised even me. "I will talk to the district attorney about a restitution agreement instead of criminal prosecution," I told them. "But I have conditions." They listened intently as I outlined my terms: family therapy to address our dysfunctional patterns, complete financial transparency moving forward, and a structured repayment plan for the portion of my savings that could not be recovered through the bank's actions. Most importantly, when Jason eventually resurfaced, they would not bail him out or enable his evasion of responsibility. My father looked at me with a mixture of relief and newfound respect. My mother reached for my hand, which this time I did not pull away. "You are giving us a chance we probably do not deserve," she said softly. "I am giving our family a chance to heal," I corrected her. "Whether we deserve it or not is less important than what we do with it." As they left my apartment that evening, I felt a strange sense of peace despite the uncertainty ahead. For the first time in our family history, truth had replaced pretense. Accountability had replaced enabling. And perhaps most importantly, I had found my voice and the courage to use it. The road ahead would not be easy, but it would be honest. And in that honesty lay the possibility of genuine healing. 1 year after discovering the theft of my savings, I stood in the kitchen of my new home. It was smaller than the one I had originally hoped to buy, located in a less desirable neighborhood, but it was mine. The down payment had come from the recovered funds, supplemented by another year of aggressive saving. My mortgage payments were higher than I had planned, but manageable with careful budgeting. Through the window, I could see the small garden I had planted in the backyard, the vegetable seedlings just beginning to emerge from the soil. Like them, I was putting down new roots, rebuilding my life with a greater appreciation for both resilience and vulnerability. The past year had been transformative for my family in ways I never could have anticipated. The district attorney had agreed to my request for a restitution agreement rather than criminal prosecution. My parents had avoided jail time, but were required to complete financial counseling, perform community service, and adhere to a strict repayment schedule for the remaining funds they owed me. They had sold the family home, a painful but necessary step toward financial recovery. The sale had allowed them to pay off the defaulted loan and purchase a small 2-bedroom condominium that better suited their retirement needs. My mother had taken a part-time job at a local bookstore to supplement their income, while my father had joined a retiree volunteer program that utilized his organizational skills. Our weekly family therapy sessions had been challenging but illuminating. Under the guidance of Dr. Marissa Chen, a family therapist specializing in financial trauma, we had excavated decades of dysfunctional patterns. My mother had confronted her tendency to enable Jason at everyone else's expense. My father had acknowledged how his pride and authority had prevented him from admitting financial problems until it was too late. I had recognized my own role in our family dynamic, how my competence and self-sufficiency had sometimes allowed them to focus all their attention on Jason. Jason himself had finally resurfaced 3 months after disappearing. He had been staying with a friend in Milwaukee, working as a bartender under the table while avoiding the consequences of his actions. When he realized that our parents would not be sending him money or hiring him a lawyer, he had reluctantly returned to face the music. The reunion had been tense and tearful. Jason had alternated between defensiveness, charm, and genuine remorse. The district attorney had charged him with fraud and receiving stolen property, but offered a plea deal that included restitution, probation, and mandatory financial counseling rather than jail time. To everyone's surprise, especially mine, Jason had taken his second chance seriously. He had moved into a modest apartment, found legitimate work at a restaurant, and begun making small but consistent payments toward restitution. He attended therapy both individually and with the family, slowly confronting the entitlement and irresponsibility that had defined his adult life. Our relationship remained fragile. Trust, once broken, could not be instantly restored. But there were moments of genuine connection that gave me hope we might eventually rebuild a healthier sibling bond. As for my parents, our relationship had evolved into something more honest and equal. They no longer saw me as the perpetually capable daughter who needed less support and attention. I no longer viewed them as infallible authorities. We were simply adults trying to love each other while respecting boundaries and acknowledging our separate journeys. The financial impact of their betrayal remained significant. Despite the partial recovery and ongoing restitution, I had lost years of progress toward my goals. My retirement savings had been delayed. My emergency fund was smaller than financial advisors recommended. The home I had purchased required renovations. I was completing gradually as funds allowed. But the experience had also brought unexpected gifts. I had discovered strength I did not know I possessed. The courage to stand up for myself even when it was painful. I had learned that family loyalty does not require sacrificing my own well-being or enabling harmful behavior. I had built deeper friendships with people like Emma and Sarah who had supported me unconditionally through the darkest moments. Most importantly, I had gained a profound understanding of the difference between giving from abundance and giving from depletion. True generosity comes from a secure foundation, not from surrendering one's own stability. On this quiet Sunday afternoon, as I arranged fresh flowers in a vase my mother had given me as a housewarming gift, my phone chimed with a text message. It was from my father confirming they would be coming for dinner that evening as planned. Attached was a photo of the check they had just mailed for this month's restitution payment. The simple act of transparency, once unimaginable in our family, now formed the cornerstone of our healing process. No secrets, no unspoken expectations, no sacrifices without consent. As I prepared the meal we would share, I reflected on how family love at its healthiest functions, like the roots of the plants in my garden, providing support and nourishment while allowing independent growth, not entangling, not suffocating, but connecting in ways that strengthen rather than diminish. My journey had been painful, but the lessons learned would guide me through future relationships with greater wisdom and clearer boundaries. Trust now came with verification. Love came with respect, and family loyalty included accountability. If you have ever experienced betrayal by those closest to you, I hope my story reminds you that healing is possible. Even when the path forward looks nothing like you imagined, sometimes the deepest wounds become the doorways to our most important growth. Have you ever had to establish difficult boundaries with family members? How did you balance self-protection with maintaining relationships? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to support more stories of resilience and healing. And remember, protecting your own well-being is not selfish. It is the foundation that allows you to truly be present for others. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I wish you strength and clarity in your own.